Good day, friends. Welcome to Gord's Poetry Show number 90. We're getting high in the numbers. It won't be long until we reach number 100. Today I would like to honor the contribution and recent passing of Charles Simic. I believe he was from Serbia originally. Lived in America a long time and wrote many, many fine poems. I've been charmed with them for many years, and I still am. Heights of Folly. Oh, crows circling over my head and cawing. I admit to being at times, suddenly and without the slightest warning, exceedingly happy. On a morning otherwise sunless, strolling arm in arm past some gallows-shaped trees with my dear Helen, who is also a strange bird. A feeling of being summoned urgently, but by a most gracious invitation to breakfast on slices of watermelon in the company of naked gods and goddesses on a patch of last night's snow. Winter sunset. Such skies came to worry men on the eve of great battles, clouds soaked in blood of the dying day that made the horses restless. So the soothsayers were summoned, but kept their mouths shut about the meaning of it, even when shown the naked sword. The gloomy heavens made gloomier by the shadow play of unknown tribes, and their horses on the run. The white church tower of the First Congregational clutching its bird-shaped weather vane against it all, but the village deserted. Not a soul in sight. The people indoors afraid to get up and turn on the lights. Some young farm woman, dress unbuttoned, a small child on her knees, its head turning away from her full breast. Eyes full of the sky's terror and luster. A word said by a child who doesn't know the meaning of it. The neighbors coming to hear all about it, but the door's locked, no one at home. It's such a nice warm day to be lost in the strange city, the map of ancient Rome in your pocket. Or is it Jerusalem? Please make him stop, she says. We can only see her blood-red fingernails drying on the windowsill. The one she's speaking to remains silent. He's just an idea anyway, sulking in some back room with a somber view of its own. The child who cannot be put into words. The meaning. Hidden like that small boy they couldn't find the day they played hide and seek in a park full of dead trees. "We give up," they yelled. It was getting dark. They had to summon his mother to order him to come out. First she threatened him, then she was frightened. At long last they heard a twig snap behind their backs. And there it was, the stone dwarf, the angel in the fountain. Celestial overseers. Do they count my steps meticulously? Have they reached a figure of many zeros separated by commas? Could I have walked to the nearest star already? Recall for me, please, one of my first steps. I want the suit I was wearing that day pressed. I want my mother to hold my hand tightly. That must be our grandmother there in the open coffin. Her hands are chapped from scrubbing so much. The floor we walk on in black shoes. The 3 little steps I took then so that I might be lifted up to kiss her, and the 3 equally tiny ones to withdraw. Do they still resound at ever-receding magnitudes? Could this large dog sitting sphinx-like by the grey Atlantic shore still hear my new shoes squeaking on the other side of the world? I wonder. Beyond appearances. A sort of vast, undetected conspiracy in which even the leaves participate. When they rustle, when they deign to fall, it's because they've been told to. There had to be many clandestine meetings to which the wind and its cohorts were invited. They gave the secret password, something above suspicion like, "It's morning." There's a strange man walking past our house. If he's a hunter, why is he wearing black? Before we can decide, he has vanished, and the dog didn't even bother to lift his head. A cold day breaking over the fields. At least there should have been a cloud of breath preceding him, plus 1 or 2 other things we still can't bring ourselves to mention. 14th Street poem. The bag lady who shouted she was Venus, the goddess of love, had 2 front teeth missing. It was a long block favoured by doomsday prophets, blind street musicians, dogs licking their padlocks. Photographs of missing children watched us meet and separate. Me with a deep bow, her with a finger on her lips, making it our secret. Windy evening. This old world needs propping up when it gets this cold and windy. The cleverly painted sets, oh, they're shaking badly. They're about to come down. There'll be nothing but infinite space then. The silence supreme. Almighty silence. Egyptian sky. Stars like torches of grave robbers entering the crypts of the kings. Even the wind pausing, waiting to see. Better grab hold of that tree, Lucille. Its shape crazed, terror-stricken. I'll hold the barn. The chickens in it uneasy. Smart chickens, rickety world. The Scarecrow. God's refuted, but the devil's not. This year's tomatoes are something to see. Bite into them, Martha, as you would into a ripe apple. After each bite, add a little salt. If the juices run down your chin onto your bare breasts, bend over the kitchen sink. From there you can see your husband come to a dead stop in the empty field before one of his bleakest thoughts, spreading its arms like a scarecrow. Isn't this wonderful? The Book of Magic. It called for the evening to come, the table to be spread with white cloth, 2 apples, 2 knives to be set out, and a single glass of red wine. It called for him to be asleep in bed, for 2 unknown women to enter, to eat the apples, drink the wine, and decide which one will stay with him. But now it was still a little early. He was the one lying in bed, staring at the darkening ceiling. The evening will never come. The trees will darken and grow still. But the sky will keep its pale color, and so will the tablecloth. And the evening will never come. He will lie there with the window open, listening for their footsteps. He will tell himself how the women have taken off their high-heeled shoes. They're coming arm in arm with the evening and its shadows. If even now he cannot hear them, if everything remains just as it was, it's because they're taking care not to be seen, coming to stay with him. The dark hours, the unknown women. In the library. There's a book called The Dictionary of Angels. No one has opened it in 50 years. I know, because when I did, the covers creaked, the pages crumbled. There I discovered the angels were once as plentiful as species of flies. The sky at dusk used to be thick with them. You had to wave both arms just to keep them away. Now the sun is shining through the tall windows. The library is a quiet place. Angels and gods huddled in dark, unopened books. The great secret lies on some shelf. Miss Jones passes every day on her rounds. She's very tall, so she keeps her head tipped as if listening. The books are whispering. I hear nothing, but she does. Babylon. Every time I prayed, the universe got bigger and I got smaller. My wife almost stepped on me. I saw her huge legs rising to dizzying heights. The hair between them glistened like a god's beard. She looked Babylonian. I'm getting smaller every minute, I yelled, but she could not hear me. Among the winged lions and ziggurats, the mad astrologers of her painted eyes. Paradise. In a neighborhood once called Hell's Kitchen, where a beggar claimed to be playing Nero's fiddle while the city burned in midsummer heat, where a lady barber who called herself Cleopatra wielded the scissors of fate over my head, threatening to cut off my ears and nose, where a man and a woman went walking naked in one of the dark side streets at dawn. I must be dreaming, I told myself. It was like meeting a couple of sphinxes. I expected them to have wings, bodies of lions, him with his wildly tattooed chest, her with her huge dangling breasts. It happened so quickly and so long ago. You know that time just before the day breaks, when one yearns to lie down on cool sheets in a room with shades drawn? The hour when the beautiful suicides lying side by side in the morgues get up and walk out into the first light? The curtains of cheap hotels flying out of windows like seagulls, but everything else quiet. Steam rising out of the subway gratings, bodies glistening with sweat. Madness, and you might even say paradise. The pieces of the clock lie scattered. So hurry up, the evening's coming, the grown-ups are on their way, there'll be hell to pay. You forgot about time while you sought its secret in the slippery wheels, some of which had teeth. You meant to enthrall the girl across the hall. She drew so near, her breast brushed your ear. She ought to have gone home, but you kept telling her you'll have it together again, and ticking in no time. Instead, you're under the table together, searching the floor. Your hands are trembling, and there's a key in the door. A bit of mummery. In the corner of your eye, where death cools his heels, a skit, a dumb show that took a wink to perform, that took an eternity. Your mother and father with a ventriloquist's dummy. That was you with cheeks painted red, approaching a couple of soldiers. They are armed. The woman is pleading. The dummy sits on your father's arms, grinning from ear to ear. It's a day like today, 30 years ago, so bright, so sunny. Everybody has to squint. Marching music. Our history is both tragic and comic. Beat the big drum, fellows, horsemen of the apocalypse. What fun it was to pull your horses' tails. The earth trembled. Mighty towers collapsed, towers of chairs still warm with the backsides of kings and queens, towers of piss-pots too, where our philosophers sat thinking. We stood with our mouths open, admiring the fashionable black hoods the horses and the coachmen wore as they hauled off the trash to the infinite. Beat the big drum, fellows. On the square of eternal happiness, a woman ran by shrieking, hugging a blood-stained shirt. History, as in frightening toys. History practicing its scissor clips in the dark. So everything comes out in the end, missing an arm or a leg. Still, if that's all you've got to play with today, this doll at least had a head and its lips were red. Frame houses like grim exhibits, lining the empty street where a little girl sat on the steps in a flowered nightgown, talking to it. It looked like serious matter. Even the rain wanted to hear about it, so it fell on her eyelashes and made them glisten. The betrothal. I found a key in the street, someone's house key lying there glinting. Long ago, the one who lost it is not going to remember it tonight as I do. It was a huge city of many dark windows, columns and domes. I stood there thinking. The street ahead of me shadowy, full of peril. Now that I held the key. One or two late strollers, unhurried and grave in view. The sky above them of an unearthly clarity. Eternity jealous of the present moment, it occurred to me. And then the moment was over. I recently discovered a collection of his short prose called The Life of Images. And there's all sorts of interesting things, reflections on this section is called Notes on Poetry and Philosophy. Very quiet. Psst. Every new metaphor is a new thought, a fragment of a new myth of reality. Metaphor is a part of the not knowing aspect of art, and yet I'm firmly convinced that it is the supreme way of searching for truth. How can this be? I don't know. I have never been able to figure it out to my satisfaction. Poetry attracts me because it makes trouble for thinkers. Oh, that is good, Charles. Poetry attracts me because it makes trouble for thinkers. To understand, is that against nature, against God? I like a poem that understates, that leaves out, breaks off, remains open-ended. A poem as a piece of the unutterable whole. To complete, to pretend that it is possible to do so, and here too I'm following Heidegger, is to set arbitrary boundaries to what is boundless. Emily Dickinson's poems do that for me. Her ambiguities are philosophical. She lives with uncertainties, even delights in them. To the great questions she remains unshielded, as Heidegger would say. The nature of presence is itself her subject. The awe of the supreme mystery of consciousness watching itself. Ideally, then, a poem that speculates is full of mirrors, is measuring the gap between words and what they presume to name, the gap between being and being said. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. The gap between being and being said. Like a barber college haircut, with a little quote from Jack Spicer to begin, poets think they're pitchers when they're really catchers. Everything would be very simple if we could will our metaphors. We cannot. This is true of poems too. We may start believing that we are recreating an experience, that we are making an attempt at mimesis. But then the language takes over. Suddenly the words have a mind of their own. It's like saying, I wanted to go to church, but the poem took me to the dog races. When it first happened, I was horrified. It took me years to admit that the poem is smarter than I am. Now I go where it wants to go. These are all little chapters from as a commentary on an essay linking my own poetry with Heidegger's philosophy for New Literary History in 1989. "O Paradiso," my pop sang in the shower. The 20th century poet is a metaphysician in the dark, according to Wallace Stevens. That sounds to me like a version of that old joke about chasing a black cat in a dark room. The room today is more crowded than ever. In addition to poetry, theology is also there, and so are various representatives of Western and Eastern philosophies. There's a lot of bumping of heads in the dark. The famous kitty, however, isn't there. Still, the poets continue to cry from time to time, We got her, folks. Unless, of course, it's the devil himself they've got by the tail instead. The fish is Sphinx to the cat. There is a major misunderstanding in literary criticism as to how ideas get into poems. The poets supposedly proceed in one of these two ways. They either state their ideas directly or they find equivalents for them. What is usually called philosophical poetry seems to be either a poetry of heightened eloquence or some variety of symbolism. In each case, the assumption is that the poet knows beforehand what he or she wishes to say, and the writing of the poem is the search for the most effective means of gussying up these ideas. If this were correct, poetry would simply repeat what has been thought and said before. There would be no poetic thinking in the way Heidegger conceives of it. There would be no hope that poetry could have any relation to truth. In a head this old, there's a blind hen that occasionally finds a kernel of corn, and her name is Love. My poems in the beginning are like a table on which one places interesting things one has found on one's walks. A pebble, a rusty nail, a strangely shaped root, the corner of a torn photograph, etc. Where after months of looking at them and thinking about them daily, certain surprising relationships, which hint at meanings, begin to appear. These objets trouvés, these objets trouvés of poetry are, of course, bits of language. The poem is the place where one hears what the language is really saying, where the full meaning of words begins to emerge. That's not quite right. It's not so much what the words mean that is crucial, but rather what they show and reveal. The literal leads to the figurative, and every inside poetic figure of value. There is a theatre where a play is in progress. The play is about gods and demons and the world in its baffling presence and variety. In its essence, an interesting poem is the epistemological and metaphysical problem for the poet. The way a child studies the minute hand of his watch. Back in 1965, I sent some of my object poems, Fork among them, to a literary magazine. They came back with a letter that said something like this: "Dear Mr. Simic, you're obviously a sensible young man, so why do you waste your time by writing about knives, spoons, and forks?" I guess the editor's premise was that there were things worthy of poetry and that the fork in my hand was not one of them. In other words, serious subjects and serious ideas make serious poems, etc. He was just trying to give me fatherly advice. I was surprised by the resistance some people had to these poems. "Back to the things themselves," said Husserl. And the imagist had the same idea. An object is the irreducible itself, a convenient place to begin, it seemed to me. What appealed to me too was the discipline, the attention required, and the dialectics that went with it. You look and you don't see. It's so familiar that it is invisible, etc. I mean, anybody can tell when you're faking it. Everybody is an expert when it comes to forks. Plus, all genuine poetry, in my view, is anti-poetry. Maybe another little poem to finish off. A letter. Dear philosophers, I get sad when I think, is it the same with you? Just as I'm about to sink my teeth into the noumenon, some old girlfriend comes to distract me. She's not even alive, I yell to the skies. The wintry light made me go that way. I saw beds covered with identical grey blankets. I saw grim-looking men holding a naked woman while they hosed her with cold water. Was that to calm her nerves, or was it punishment? I went to visit my friend Rob, who said to me, "We reach the real by overcoming the seduction of images." I was overjoyed until I realized such abstinence will never be possible for me. I caught myself looking out the window. Bob's father was taking their dog for a walk. He moved with pain. The dog waited for him. There was no one else in the park, only bare trees with an infinity of tragic shapes to make thinking difficult. To make thinking difficult. I don't think this guy likes to think very much. And I hope he's continuing whatever he loves doing in the eternal world of the beyond. And thank you for all the gifts, Charles. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Blessings on your passing.